You're nothing without that company. Everyone knows it. A stranger said that to her face, right there in a grocery store, in a town she hadn't set foot in for 20 years. Serena Voss didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice. She picked up her coffee and walked out like the words had passed straight through her. But her hands were shaking the entire drive home. 3 months ago, she was on the cover of Forbes, CEO of a $40 million empire. The kind of woman people studied, envied, feared. Today, she was back in Havenwood, Tennessee, population 4,200, no Michelin stars, and exactly the kind of small town she had spent her entire adult life escaping, with a crumbling house, $70 in her account, and a bankruptcy filing with her name on every page. She hadn't failed. She'd been betrayed by the one person she trusted most. She knew it. She just had no way to prove it. Then Caleb Turner walked into her life. A black single father, quiet, steady, always showing up with a tool bag and his 8-year-old daughter in tow, offering help she never asked for, with a calm she couldn't shake or control or push away. He had lost something too, something much harder to recover from than a company. But he was still standing, still choosing kindness, every single day. Serena didn't understand him, didn't trust him, didn't want anything to do with him. And she had absolutely no idea what the next 60 days were about to do to her. If you're new here, this channel tells stories about real human transformation. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Serena had built her entire personality around one principle: never let them see you bleed. She had learned it young. She was 9 years old when her father packed a single bag, set it by the front door, and walked out without looking back. Her mother had cried for 3 days straight. Serena had watched and decided, quietly, permanently, that she would never be the one left behind. She would be the one who left first, the one who needed nothing, the one no one could touch. By 40, she had turned that decision into an empire. Voss Luxe Cosmetics had started with a single product line and a maxed-out credit card. 18 years later, it was a $40 million operation with offices in Atlanta, New York, and Miami. Serena ran it with the kind of precision that made her executives nervous and her competitors paranoid. She didn't do sentiment. She didn't do vulnerability. She did results. Then, Victor Hale happened. Victor had been her CFO for 6 years. Brilliant, charming, and, as it turned out, systematically draining company funds into a network of shell accounts while Serena's name sat on every document. By the time the fraud surfaced, the paper trail pointed straight at her. Victor had made sure of that. She had no proof. He had everything. The bankruptcy filing came first, then the investigations, then the press. She lost the company, the penthouse, the car, and every professional relationship she had spent 2 decades carefully constructing. People who had called her a visionary in January were calling her a criminal by March. What she had left? A deed to a house in Havenwood, Tennessee. Her mother, Ruth, had passed 8 months earlier, quietly, the way she had lived, without asking for anything from anyone, including her daughter. Serena had been too busy to come home for the last 2 years of Ruth's life. She told herself her mother understood. She was still telling herself that. Havenwood was exactly as she remembered it, and she meant that as an insult. One main street with a hardware store, a diner, a church, and a post office that kept bankers' hours. A water tower with the town's name painted in faded blue letters. Yards full of vegetable gardens and plastic lawn chairs. People who waved at strangers from their porches like it cost them nothing. Serena had grown up ashamed of all of it. She had left at 18 on a full academic scholarship and never looked back. Now she was pulling up to her mother's house for the first time in 2 years. It looked smaller than she remembered. The porch railing was warped. One of the shutters hung at an angle. The garden her mother had tended obsessively was overgrown. Serena sat in the car for a long moment, both hands on the wheel. Then she got out because there was nothing else to do. She met Caleb Turner the next morning. She had walked to the small grocery on the corner to buy coffee, and he was already there, holding the door open for an elderly woman carrying 2 bags that were clearly too heavy for her. He waited until she was fully through, asked if she needed help to her car, and smiled when she said no with the easy patience of someone who had all the time in the world. Serena stepped past him without a word. His name was Caleb Turner, 38 years old, single father, owner of Turner's Auto Repair on the south end of Maple Street. A man the whole town called for everything, not just cars, because he was the kind of person who showed up, and that reputation had a way of spreading. She would learn these details later from other people, the way you learn things in small towns, without asking, without wanting to. He had a daughter named Nia, who was 8 years old and missing her 2 front teeth, and he had been a widower for 3 years. His wife, Diana, had died of ovarian cancer, stage 3 when they caught it. Caleb had sold the truck, the good tools, everything he could liquidate to cover the medical costs. Insurance had only gone so far. Diana fought for nearly 2 years, and she lost. And Nia had been 5 years old when it happened and barely remembered her mother's face now, which was, as Mrs. Patterson next door would later tell Serena, its own kind of heartbreak. What Serena didn't know yet, couldn't have known from a brief doorway encounter, was that Caleb had spent the 3 years since Diana's death asking himself one question he could never answer. If he had found a way to make more money, to get better doctors, to do something differently, would she still be here? He didn't know. He would never know. But the question had quietly taken over the way he lived. He worked constantly. He helped everyone within reach. He gave freely and refused to receive, as if doing enough good for enough people might somehow shift a balance that could not be shifted. He was a man running himself into the ground for reasons he had never said out loud. Serena, standing in the doorway of a grocery store with a container of instant coffee and zero interest in anyone's story, had no idea she was looking at someone who understood something essential about her, even if the shape of it was entirely different. It took less than 48 hours for Havenwood to recognize her. She had underestimated small towns. In Atlanta, anonymity was easy. You were just another face moving through a city too large and too busy to care. In Havenwood, everyone knew everyone, and everyone had a phone. By the second afternoon, she could feel it happening. The woman at the diner who looked up from the counter and held her gaze a beat too long. The 2 men outside the hardware store who stopped talking when she walked past. A teenage girl who whispered something to her friend and glanced back over her shoulder. They knew. Of course they knew. The story had been everywhere. Cable news, financial blogs, the kind of breathless online coverage that spread faster than any correction ever would. Former CEO Serena Voss faces fraud allegations as empire collapses. There had been a photo that ran particularly wide. Serena outside the courthouse in Atlanta, jaw set, eyes forward, looking, according to the caption, defiant. She had simply been trying not to cry. She bought her groceries quickly and left. In the car, she sat for a moment with both hands flat on the steering wheel. The sky outside had turned the color of a bruise, heavy clouds pressing down over the tree line. Rain was coming. She started driving, not toward her mother's house, just driving because moving felt better than sitting still with the particular silence of a town that was watching her. She didn't know the roads. She had left at 18 and spent the next 22 years making sure she never had to come back. The rural routes outside the town center were narrow and unmarked, and by the time the rain hit, hard, sudden, the way summer storms in Tennessee arrived without warning, she was on a road she didn't recognize, going too fast for the conditions. She felt the rear tires lose traction before she had time to react. The car slid sideways, then dropped, a lurch that compressed her spine and knocked the air out of her chest, and came to a stop half submerged in a drainage ditch on the side of the road. The engine choked and died. Rain hammered the roof. Water was already pushing in at the bottom of the door. For 3 full seconds, Serena didn't move. Then the door was being pulled open from the outside. "Ma'am, hey, can you hear me?" Caleb Turner was standing in the rain with his 8-year-old daughter 10 feet behind him, both of them already soaked through. He had one hand braced on the car frame and the other extended toward her, his voice steady and calm in the way of someone who had already assessed the situation and decided panic wasn't useful. Serena stared at him. "I need you to take my hand," he said. "The ditch is filling. We need to move now." She took his hand. He pulled. She came out of the car sideways, one heel catching on the door frame, and ended up on the muddy shoulder of the road with her blazer soaked through and her hair plastered flat against her face. She was shaking. Adrenaline, she told herself. Just adrenaline. Caleb checked her over quickly, eyes moving from her face to her hands to her feet. "You hurt anywhere?" "I'm fine," she said. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. The default setting, the reflex she couldn't turn off. She stepped back, putting distance between them, acutely aware of exactly what she looked like. The disgraced CEO, standing in the mud on the side of a back road, dripping, shaking, needing to be pulled out of a ditch by a stranger. "You don't have to," she started. "I'm just going to check the car," Caleb said, already moving toward it. Not dismissive, not wounded, simply practical. He crouched at the front of the vehicle, assessed the undercarriage, straightened up. "You're not driving that out tonight. Front axle's compromised." He looked at her steadily. "Road back to town gets worse before it gets better in this rain. I can drive you back." Naya had appeared at his side without Serena noticing, a small figure in a yellow raincoat, watching Serena with enormous dark eyes. Not afraid, just curious. Serena looked at the child, then at Caleb, then at the car sitting lopsided in the ditch. "I don't need your help," she said. Caleb held her gaze for a moment, then he nodded once, the way a person nods when they've heard something they disagree with but have chosen not to argue about. "Offer stands," he said. He took Nia's hand. "Road's gonna be bad for another hour at least. I'd wait it out before you call a tow." He walked back to his truck without another word. Serena stood alone on the side of the road in the rain, the wrecked car behind her, and felt, underneath the cold, underneath the humiliation, underneath the anger she had reached for automatically, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt small. She hated it. The tow truck took 2 hours and cost more than she wanted to spend. She waited it out in Caleb's truck, not because she wanted to, but because Nia had simply climbed out of the vehicle, walked over to where Serena was standing in the rain, and said with complete seriousness, "You can sit with us. Dad won't talk if you don't want him to." Serena had looked down at the child, then at the sky, then at the ditch. She got in the truck. Caleb, true to his daughter's word, didn't say anything beyond the necessary. He turned the heat on. He handed Serena a folded flannel shirt from behind the seat without comment, the kind of practical gesture that didn't ask for gratitude. Nia fell asleep against the window within 20 minutes, her yellow raincoat bunched up under her cheek. Serena sat with her hands folded in her lap and stared at the rain and said nothing. When the tow truck finally arrived, Caleb spoke briefly with the driver and drove her back to her mother's house without being asked. He pulled up to the curb. She got out. She said thank you in the flattest possible voice because she had been raised with manners even when she didn't want them. He said, "Good night, Ms. Voss," and drove away. The house was worse than she had let herself admit. The ceiling in the back bedroom had a water stain the size of a dining table. The kitchen faucet produced a sound like an argument before producing any actual water. The heating unit was old enough to belong in a museum, and when she tried to turn it on, the lights in the hallway flickered twice and died. She called an electrician. He didn't call back. She called a plumber. He said he was booked out 3 weeks. She tried 4 more numbers over the next 2 days. 2 didn't answer. 1 answered, recognized her name, and suddenly became very busy. 1 came out, looked around, quoted her a number that assumed she still had money, and left when she couldn't commit on the spot. By the 3rd morning, she had a working flashlight, a sleeping bag from the Havenwood hardware store, and a very clear understanding that the town was not going to make this easy for her. She was sitting on the porch steps with a cup of instant coffee when she heard boots on the front walk. Caleb Turner was coming up the path with a canvas tool bag over one shoulder and Nia walking beside him eating a piece of toast. Serena stood up. "I didn't call you," she said. "No," he agreed. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at her with the same steady calm she was beginning to find genuinely irritating. "Mrs. Patterson next door mentioned the lights went out. She used to call your mother when things went wrong with the house. She called me instead. I do odd jobs around the neighborhood, not just the shop. Your mother knew that." "I have it handled." Caleb glanced at the flashlight sitting on the porch railing. He didn't say anything. "I'm in the process of handling it," Serena said. "The main breaker box is probably the issue," he said. "It's an older panel. Your mother had the same problem twice last winter. Takes about 40 minutes to fix." He paused. "I'm not here because I think you can't manage. I'm here because your mother was good to my family when we needed it, and I'd like to return that if you'll let me." Serena opened her mouth, closed it. "She used to bring food," Nia offered helpfully from behind her father. "When my mom was sick, like a lot of food. Dad says Grandma Ruth made the best cornbread in the county." The word mom landed quietly in the air between all three of them. Serena looked at the child, then at Caleb. His expression hadn't changed, but something behind his eyes had shifted. Brief, controlled, the look of a man who had learned to absorb certain words without showing what they cost him. She recognized it. She had spent 20 years perfecting the same skill. 40 minutes, she said finally. "Give or take. You're not doing it for free. I'll pay the going rate." "It's not charity," he said. "It's a neighbor fixing a breaker box. But if it makes it easier, you can pay me in coffee." Nia already had breakfast. Nia held up her toast in confirmation. Serena looked at both of them standing on her front path in the early morning light. The man with his quiet, unshakable patience, and the little girl with her half-eaten toast, and felt something shift slightly in her chest. Not warmth exactly, more like the very first give in something that had been pulled tight for a very long time. "Fine," she said, "but you fix the breaker and that's it. You don't ask about Atlanta, you don't offer opinions, and you don't feel sorry for me." "Understood," Caleb said. He came up the steps. She held the door open, and for the first time since she had arrived in Havenwood, the house stopped feeling entirely like a place she was trapped in. The breaker box took 50 minutes, not 40. Caleb didn't apologize for the extra 10. He simply packed his tools, accepted the cup of coffee Serena set on the kitchen counter without a word, drank half of it standing up, and left. No conversation, no lingering. He had said 40 minutes, delivered something close to it, and gone. She told herself she found that acceptable. What she found less acceptable over the following 2 weeks was how often he appeared. Not at her house. He respected the boundary she had drawn. But Havenwood was small, and Caleb Turner was apparently everywhere in it. She saw him at the grocery store, helping an older man load bags into a truck that had seen better decades. She saw him on the street outside the diner, crouched down to fix a flat tire on a woman's wheelchair with a portable kit he happened to be carrying. She drove past his shop one evening and saw him still working at 7:30, the bay doors open, a car up on the lift that she was fairly certain belonged to the pastor of the church on Elm Street. She asked Mrs. Patterson about it because Mrs. Patterson had opinions about everything and would share them without being asked. "That's just Caleb," the older woman said, as if it explained everything. "He's been like that since Diana passed. Works himself half to death. Won't let anybody do a thing for him. But you call him at 2 in the morning because your pipes burst and he'll be there by 2:15. "That's not sustainable," Serena said. Mrs. Patterson looked at her with the patience of a woman who had outlived several certainties. "No," she agreed. "It's not." He came back to the house the following Saturday because the porch railing was a liability, and he had apparently decided that was his business. Serena was working at the kitchen table when she heard hammering. She went to the window. Caleb was on the porch with a replacement section of railing, Nia sitting on the steps beside him doing something with a sketchbook. She went outside. "I didn't ask for this," she said. "Railin's rotted through," he said without looking up. "Someone's gonna lean on it and go through, probably you." "I know how to avoid a damaged railing." "Now you won't have to." He drove a nail with 2 clean strokes. "I had the lumber left over from another job. Wasn't gonna use it." Serena stood there for a moment, aware she had no actual argument that wasn't simply, "I don't want you here," which was true but felt unreasonable when the man was fixing something that needed fixing with materials he'd already paid for. She went back inside and made 2 cups of coffee. The argument happened on a Tuesday. She had spent the morning going through the shop's basic financials. Caleb had mentioned offhandedly that the bank loan was coming due, and she had asked to look at the numbers the way a doctor asks to see an X-ray, professionally, without drama. What she saw was a slow bleed. The shop was profitable in principle, but structurally generous to a fault. A third of the monthly service tickets were either deeply discounted or written off entirely. The equipment lease was overpriced for what it covered, and the banknote, restructured twice already, had terms that were becoming untenable. She put together a plan, clean, logical, workable within 6 months. She laid it out for him that evening on the kitchen table. Caleb looked at it carefully. He asked 2 questions, then he set it down. "No," he said. Serena blinked. "You haven't finished reading it." "I read enough." He pushed the papers back toward her gently. "You want me to stop taking the accounts I can't fully charge? Stop the payment plans? Focus on customers who can pay full rate?" "It would stabilize the shop within—" "I know what it would do." His voice was even, but there was something underneath it now, something with weight. "There's a family on Grover Street. Single mother, 3 kids, 1 car. That car is how she gets to work. I've been carrying her account for 8 months. He paused. "If I cut her off, she loses the job. You understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand that sentiment is not a business model," Serena said. "And I understand that a business with no soul isn't worth saving." She felt her jaw tighten. "You have a daughter. You have a shop that's going to be seized by the bank." "I know exactly when it's going to be seized. I've known for months. I'm working on it." "How? By working 7 days a week and giving half of it away?" Something crossed his face, fast, controlled, gone before she could name it. "You want to talk about working yourself into the ground," he said quietly, "and still ending up with nothing to show for it. I think you might know something about that too." The kitchen went very still. Serena opened her mouth, closed it. "That's not the same," she said finally. "Maybe not," Caleb said. "But you built something for 20 years and it still fell apart. So did I in a different way. The difference is I know why mine is struggling, and I'm not willing to fix it by becoming something I'm not." He stood, picked up his jacket, and left. Serena sat at the table for a long time after, the pages of her proposal in front of her. She thought about 20 years of 70-hour weeks and a penthouse she had eaten alone in more nights than she could count. She thought about what he'd said, still ending up with nothing to show for it, and couldn't find a place to put it that didn't sting. She didn't sleep well that night. She found out about Diana from Mrs. Patterson, sideways, while they were standing in the front yard talking about Ruth's rose bushes. "Caleb put in a lot of hours after Diana passed," Mrs. Patterson said. "Picked up every job he could find. I think working was the only way he knew how to keep moving." She clipped a dead stem. "He was already working hard before, trying to cover the medical bills. Insurance only went so far." Serena kept her eyes on the rose bush. What did she have? Ovarian cancer, stage 3 when they caught it. She fought for almost 2 years. Caleb sold the truck, the good tools, everything he could liquidate. Still wasn't enough. A pause. Nia was 5 when Diana died. Serena said nothing. She thought about the way Caleb worked, the relentlessness of it, the way he deflected every offer of help with smooth efficiency, like someone who had practiced it so long it had become instinct. She had read it as stubbornness, as pride. She was beginning to think it was something else entirely. The real conversation happened 3 weeks later, on a night when neither of them had planned for it. Nia had fallen asleep on Serena's couch. She had taken to wandering over after school with the fearless ease of an 8-year-old who had decided Serena was interesting, and that was settled. And Caleb had come to collect her and ended up staying when Serena put coffee on without asking if he wanted any. He carried Naya carefully to the armchair in the corner and draped a blanket over her, and the child slept on without stirring while the two adults sat at the kitchen table in the quiet that follows. Somewhere between the first cup and the second, the conversation went somewhere neither of them had intended. She told him about her father. Not the whole story. She didn't have the language for the whole story yet, but the shape of it. The morning he left, the suitcase by the door, the way her mother had cried and Serena had stood in the hallway at 9 years old and made a decision she hadn't fully understood until recently. "I decided that needing people was how you got hurt," she said, "so I stopped doing it." Caleb turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to respond. Then he said, "Diana knew she was sick for almost 4 months before she told me." Serena looked at him. "She didn't want me to worry. She thought she could handle it. By the time I found out, it was already stage 3. He set the cup down. "I spent 2 years telling myself that if I had known sooner, if I had pushed harder, found better doctors, made more money, any of it, she'd still be here." He paused. "I don't know if that's true. I'll never know if that's true." "So you work," Serena said, not a question. "So I work," he said. "Help everyone I can reach. Like if I do enough of it, the math somehow changes." He exhaled slowly. "It doesn't. I know it doesn't. But it's easier than sitting still long enough to ask myself why I still get to be here when she doesn't." The kitchen was very quiet. Serena looked at him across the table and felt something open in her chest. Not dramatically, not the way things broke in movies. Just a slow, quiet give, like ice at the end of a long winter. "I built a $40 million company," she said, "and I ate dinner alone most nights." "I know," he said quietly. "I don't know how to be any other way." "I know that too." He looked at her steadily. "Doesn't mean you can't learn." Neither of them said anything after that for a while. Outside, the summer crickets were loud. Nia made a small sound in her sleep from the corner of the room, and Serena sat with the strange, uncomfortable, not entirely unwelcome feeling of being seen by someone who hadn't needed her to explain herself first. For the first time in a very long time, she didn't immediately try to make it go away. She didn't announce that she was changing her approach. That wasn't how Serena operated. She simply stopped arguing and started working. The morning after their kitchen table conversation, she sat down with a legal pad and rebuilt the problem from scratch. Not from the angle of maximum efficiency, but from the angle of what Caleb actually needed. Which was not a different business. It was the same business, made structurally sound enough to survive being run by someone constitutionally incapable of turning people away. What she came up with was a community subsidy model. Not charity, but a formalized system. Local residents and business owners who could afford full-rate service would contribute a modest monthly amount into a shared fund. That fund would cover the gap on discounted and deferred accounts. The shop stayed solvent. The single mother on Grover Street kept her car, and Caleb didn't have to choose between his values and his daughter's future. She also renegotiated the equipment lease. 3 versions in her head before she found a restructuring that worked. Then one afternoon on the phone with the leasing company presenting it as a routine modification. They agreed within the hour. She brought none of this to Caleb as a plan. She brought it as a question. "Would this work for you?" 4 words she was not accustomed to saying. They felt strange in her mouth. She said them anyway. He read through everything slowly, asked questions she hadn't expected, which meant he understood it more deeply than she had anticipated, and then looked up. "You renegotiated the lease," he said. "I made a call. On my behalf. On behalf of the numbers. The numbers were inefficient." He looked at her with an expression she was starting to recognize, something between amusement and something warmer that she didn't have a precise name for yet. "Thank you, Serena," he said. She looked away. "Don't make it into something. "I'm not," he said. "I'm just saying thank you." The community fund required buy-in from the town, which meant Serena had to talk to people she had been avoiding since she arrived. She started with Gerald, the hardware store owner, who had known her mother for 30 years, and looked at Serena with the careful neutrality of someone reserving judgment. She laid out the model in 10 minutes, answered his questions in 5, and left with a commitment. She did the same at the diner, the pharmacy, the insurance office on Main Street. It was not comfortable. Several people made it clear, in the polite Southern way that left no ambiguity, that they remembered what the news had said about her. She didn't defend herself. She explained the fund, answered the questions, and moved on. By the end of the week, she had enough commitments to make the model viable. Caleb organized the community day, his idea, his execution. A Saturday in late July, the shop bays opened for free basic inspections. The parking lot turned over to a small market where people could sell homemade goods, a folding table with lemonade that Nia presided over with great seriousness. Serena showed up at 7 in the morning and didn't leave until 6 in the evening. She helped Nia make the lemonade signs. Badly, because she had no instinct for craft projects, and Nia corrected her lettering twice with the unsentimental honesty of a child who had standards. She sat with Gerald for 40 minutes talking about his late wife because he brought her up, and Serena had learned, slowly and against her nature, that sometimes people needed to be listened to more than they needed to be helped. In the late afternoon, when the crowd had thinned and Nia had fallen asleep in a lawn chair with a lemonade cup still in her hand, Caleb came and stood beside Serena at the edge of the parking lot. "You did this," he said. "You organized it. You made it possible." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been watching you talk to people all day. You're different than you were when you got here." Serena kept her eyes on the parking lot. "Don't read too much into it." "I'm not reading into anything," he said. "I'm just telling you what I see." She didn't answer, but she didn't move away either. They stood together in the late afternoon light, close enough that their arms were almost touching, while Nia slept in the lawn chair and the last of the vendors packed up their tables, and Havenwood went quiet around them in the easy way of a town that had nowhere else to be. It was the most peace Serena had felt in years. Victor Hale arrived on a Wednesday morning in a car that cost more than most people in Havenwood made in a year. Serena saw him from the porch before he had even parked. She recognized the way he moved, deliberate, the walk of a man who had never once entered a room he didn't believe he owned. He was wearing a suit that didn't belong in this town and carrying the expression of someone who had already decided how the conversation was going to go. She didn't go inside. She waited. "Serena." He stopped at the base of the porch steps, hands in his pockets, and smiled the way he always had, warm on the surface, calculated underneath. "You look well. Victor, you have about 30 seconds before I call the sheriff." "That would be a mistake." He tilted his head. "I came to offer you a way out." The offer was what she had expected. A signed agreement placing primary responsibility for the financial irregularities on 2 junior executives who had done nothing wrong. In exchange, Victor would provide documentation clearing her name with the remaining creditors, facilitate a settlement with the board, and fund her re-entry into the Atlanta market through a vehicle no one would connect to him. She would get her name back, her career back, a version of her life back. All it would cost was 2 innocent people. "No," she said. Victor's smile didn't waver. "I thought you might say that. So I want you to know that I've already begun acquiring distressed debt in this county." He paused, letting it land. "Including the note on a certain auto repair shop on Maple Street." Serena went very still. "The owner seems like a good man," Victor said pleasantly. "It would be a shame if his situation became more complicated than it already is." He was gone within the hour. Serena sat on the porch steps for a long time after, running through options with the systematic focus she had always been able to summon in a crisis. The options were not good. Victor had resources she no longer had. He had connections she had lost. And he had just acquired the legal leverage to take Caleb's shop within 60 days. She walked to the shop that afternoon and told Caleb everything. Victor, the offer, the debt acquisition, all of it. She watched his face as she talked. He listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "How long have you known him?" he asked finally. 6 years, he was my CFO. And he knew about the community fund. He knew enough. I don't know how much. I didn't tell him directly, but he has sources. He always had sources. Caleb nodded slowly. Something had shifted in his expression. Not anger, but a careful, painful recalibration. The look of someone doing math they didn't want to do. "Caleb, I need to think," he said quietly. Victor moved faster than she had expected. Within a week, a story appeared online, picked up by 2 regional outlets and then a financial blog with a national readership. The headline was precise and devastating. Disgraced CEO Serena Voss allegedly behind rural land acquisition scheme. The accompanying documents, forged, she knew immediately because the account numbers were wrong in ways only she would recognize, showed her name attached to a shell company with options on 4 parcels of Havenwood land, including the lot where Turner's Auto Repair stood. The community fund collapsed overnight. 3 of the businesses that had committed pulled out before she could reach them. Gerald called and left a voicemail that was polite and final. The Saturday market was quietly canceled, and Caleb stopped coming by. He didn't tell her to stay away. He didn't say anything at all, which was somehow worse. She drove past the shop twice and saw him working with the bay doors closed, which he never did in the summer heat. On the second pass, she saw Nia sitting on the front step of the shop instead of ranging freely through the neighborhood the way she usually did. Small and still, in a way the child almost never was. Then a neighbor mentioned to Serena, carefully, almost apologetically, that she'd heard the bank had sent Caleb a notice. Accelerated default, 60 days to vacate Turner's Auto Repair. Serena stood in the middle of her mother's kitchen when she heard it, and felt the weight of it settle over everything. 60 days. She had destroyed this. Not alone. Victor had done the heavy work, but she had brought him here by existing, by coming back, by letting herself believe that she could be part of something without eventually burning it down. That night, for the first time since she had arrived in Havenwood, she began to pack. She got as far as 3 boxes before she found the journal. It was on the shelf in her mother's bedroom, wedged between a Bible and a collection of Langston Hughes poetry that Serena hadn't known her mother owned. A plain composition notebook, the cover soft with age, her mother's name written on the inside front page in the careful cursive Ruth had used for everything. Ruth Voss. Private. Serena sat on the edge of her mother's bed and opened it. She had not cried at her mother's funeral. She had flown in, handled the arrangements, spoken to the lawyer, and flown back to Atlanta within 72 hours because there had been a board meeting she couldn't miss. She had told herself her mother would have understood. Ruth Voss had spent 40 years understanding things about her daughter that her daughter hadn't asked her to understand. She read for 2 hours. The early entries were from years ago. Serena's childhood, her mother's observations written in the private, unguarded voice of someone who never expected to be read. Ruth wrote about the morning Serena's father left, about the way 9-year-old Serena had stood in the hallway and watched and not cried, not then, not later, and how that stillness had frightened her mother more than tears would have. She decided something that morning, Ruth had written. I could see it happen. I just didn't know how to reach her after. Serena read that sentence 3 times. The later entries were more recent. Her mother writing about Caleb and Diana, the years of illness, the way Ruth had brought food and sat with Nia so Caleb could be at the hospital. And then one entry that stopped Serena completely. A single paragraph Ruth had written about Nia, about the way the little girl sometimes went quiet and looked at photographs and didn't say anything. The particular grief of a child too young to hold memory, but old enough to feel the absence. Ruth had held her through those moments. She had understood what it meant to miss someone you could barely remember. And then, in an entry dated 14 months ago, I've been keeping some papers. Things I noticed over the years when Serena talked about the business, about Victor. Small things at first, but they add up to something. I don't know enough about finance to be sure, but I know enough about dishonest men to recognize the pattern. I'm going to send them to Serena. I keep meaning to call her first. I'll call her this weekend. The next entry was dated 3 weeks later. I didn't call. I don't know how to begin that conversation with her anymore. We've lost the language for hard things, she and I. That's my fault as much as hers. I'll write her a letter instead. I'll put the papers with the letter. There was no letter, just blank pages, and then, tucked into the back cover of the notebook, a manila envelope. Serena opened it with hands that were not entirely steady. Inside were photocopies, financial documents, internal correspondence, a series of wire transfer records that Ruth had apparently printed from somewhere, annotated in the margins in her small, careful handwriting with question marks and dates. Her mother had not understood exactly what she was looking at, but she had understood enough to save it. She had been collecting these quietly, deliberately, over years, not by accident, but because she had been paying attention to her daughter's life even when her daughter wasn't calling. The transfer records showed a pattern of outflows from Voss Lux accounts that predated the official fraud timeline by 18 months. The correspondence included 2 emails that connected the shell account structure directly to Victor's personal financial network. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to reopen the investigation. It was enough to prove that the fraud had been constructed long before Serena had any reasonable way to detect it. Her mother had tried to send her this, had printed it, annotated it, put it in an envelope, and then, because they had lost the language for hard things, had never made the call. Serena sat in the quiet bedroom with the papers in her lap and her mother's journal open beside her, and for the first time since she had arrived in Havenwood, she cried. Not the controlled, private kind she permitted herself occasionally, the other kind. The kind that had been accumulating for 8 months of not coming home, for 2 years of missed weekends, for 20 years of deciding that needing people was how you got hurt. When it was over, she sat for a long time in the stillness. Then she looked at the 3 half-packed boxes by the door. She thought about Caleb with the bay doors closed, Naya sitting still on the front step, Victor in his expensive suit explaining the terms of her surrender, and her mother, who had spent 40 years understanding things about her daughter and had never stopped trying, right up until she ran out of time. Serena set the papers carefully on the nightstand. She closed the journal. She got up, went to the kitchen, and made a phone call. Not to a moving company, not to a hotel in Atlanta, but to a securities attorney in Nashville whose name she had memorized 3 months ago and never used. She was not leaving Havenwood, not like this. Victor's public announcement was scheduled for a Saturday morning. He had rented the community center and sent invitations to regional press, 2 county commissioners, and a representative from a commercial development group based in Nashville. The presentation materials were glossy and thorough, renderings of a boutique resort complex, projected economic impact numbers, a timeline that had Turner's Auto Repair marked for demolition by the following spring. Serena spent the 3 days before the announcement on the phone. The securities attorney in Nashville confirmed what she already suspected. The documents from her mother's envelope, combined with a forensic accounting review he coordinated remotely, were sufficient to support an emergency filing with the State Financial Crimes Unit. The filing went in on Thursday. By Friday afternoon, the investigator assigned to the case had made 2 calls, one to Victor's primary lender and one to the lead investor in the resort project, whose effects she would see the following morning. She also called Gerald. He listened. He didn't commit to anything, but he didn't hang up either. She arrived at the community center 20 minutes after Victor began speaking. She had not dressed for battle the way she once would have. No power suit, no armor. She wore what she had. Dark slacks, a simple blouse, the kind of clothes she had been wearing since Atlanta stopped being her life. She walked in through the side door and stood at the back of the room while Victor narrated a slide showing an aerial rendering of the resort complex. Several people turned when she entered. She saw Gerald near the middle of the room, Mrs. Patterson in the 3rd row, and Caleb, standing against the far wall with his arms crossed, who looked at her when she came in and held her gaze for one long, unreadable moment before looking away. She walked to the front of the room. Victor stopped mid-sentence. "Ms. Voss!" "It's a public meeting in a public building," she said. She turned to face the room. Not the press, not the commissioners. The people she had been living alongside for the past 2 months. "I'll be brief." The room went very quiet. "I came back to Havenwood because I had no choice," she said. "I want to be honest about that. I didn't come back because I'd changed or because I finally understood something. I came back because I'd lost everything, and this was the only place left." She paused. "I spent my first weeks here being exactly who I've always been. Certain I was the smartest person in the room. Certain that everyone else was doing things wrong. Certain that if people would just listen to me, I could fix it." She looked at Gerald, at Mrs. Patterson, at the faces she had come to know. "I was wrong about most of it. I'm sorry for the time it took me to see that." She reached into the folder she was carrying and removed a set of documents, copies, the originals already filed in Nashville. "Victor Hale has been defrauding investors and manipulating financial records for at least 7 years. The fraud that destroyed my company was constructed by him, documented by him, and deliberately attributed to me." She set the documents on the table beside Victor's laptop. "The State Financial Crimes Unit opened a formal investigation 2 days ago. His primary lender has suspended his credit facility pending review. The resort project has no viable funding." The room erupted. Victor said something. She didn't hear what because the noise was too much and she had stopped paying attention to him. She watched the 2 county commissioners lean together in urgent conversation. She watched the press representative in the front row already typing on his phone. She watched Gerald stand up from his seat, look at her steadily for a moment, and give her a single nod. Victor left within 20 minutes, quietly, efficiently, the way a man leaves when he knows a position is no longer tenable. He would spend the following months in the middle of a federal investigation that would eventually result in charges on 4 separate counts. He did not return to Havenwood. She looked at Caleb. He was still against the wall. His arms were still crossed, but something in his posture had changed. Some of the careful containment had loosened, the way a person looks when they've been braced for impact, and the impact turned out to be something they hadn't expected. It took another hour for the room to clear. When the last people had filtered out and the community center was nearly empty, she sat down in a chair near the back and let herself be still for a moment. Her hands, she noticed, were not shaking. She was still sitting there when she heard footsteps and looked up to find Caleb standing a few feet away. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat down, forearms on his knees, looking at the empty room. "The shop," he said finally. "The bank will reinstate the original note once the debt acquisition is flagged in the investigation," she said. 2 to 3 weeks. I have it in writing from the attorney." He nodded slowly. "I'm also putting the remainder of my liquid assets into the community fund," she said. "Enough to cover the subsidy model for 2 years. After that, it should be self-sustaining if the commitments hold." She paused. "Gerald said he's back in. He called me this morning." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Serena," he said. "I know," she said. "I should have told you more about Victor when he first showed up. I thought I could manage it without it affecting you. That was the old way of thinking. Handle everything alone. Don't let anyone close enough to be involved." She stopped. "I'm sorry." He turned to look at her then, fully, directly, the way he had looked at her from the beginning, without the protective filter most people used. "I pulled back," he said. "When the story came out, I told myself it was because of the evidence, but that wasn't all of it." He exhaled. "I've spent 3 years making sure nothing could get close enough to hurt again. I thought I was protecting Nia. Mostly I was protecting myself." "That's not... It's true," he said simply. "You don't have to make it easier." They sat in the empty room for a moment, the afternoon light coming through the high windows. "I'm staying," Serena said. "In Havenwood. I've decided." Caleb looked at her. "I don't entirely know what that looks like yet," she said, "but I know I don't want to go back to what I had before. And I know that the past 2 months have been the first time in a very long time that I felt like I was living somewhere instead of just performing somewhere." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Diana used to say that home isn't where you're from, it's where you stop pretending." Serena felt the words settle in her chest. "She sounds like she was remarkable," she said quietly. "She was," he said. "She would have liked you. The real version." The corner of his mouth moved. Taken her a few weeks, but she'd have gotten there. Serena almost smiled. Almost wasn't the word. She did smile, quietly, the kind that came from somewhere real. "I'm going to need more than a few weeks," she said. "I know," Caleb said. "I'm not in a hurry." He stood and extended his hand, not as a gesture of conclusion, but of beginning. She looked at it for a moment, then took it, and he helped her to her feet with the same steady patience that had irritated her the first time she encountered it, and had somehow, without her fully noticing, become the thing she trusted most. They walked out of the community center together into the Saturday afternoon, where Havenwood was going about its business in the easy, unspectacular way of a place that had always known how to endure. A year later, Havenwood looked mostly the same. That was the thing about small towns. They absorbed change slowly, quietly, the way good soil absorbed rain. The water tower still had the faded blue lettering. The diner still closed at 8. But if you had been there the year before and came back now, you would notice things. Small things. The kind that accumulated into something you couldn't quite name but could feel. Turner's Auto Repair had a new sign. Not flashier, just cleaner. The letters repainted in the same style, the lot repaved and properly lit. The bay doors were open most mornings by 7, and there was usually a small line by 8, which was new. The community fund had held. Gerald had become its unofficial ambassador, which meant it had the particular durability of something a skeptic had chosen to believe in. Next to the shop, in the narrow lot that had previously been used for overflow parking, there was now a garden. It had been Nia's idea. She had drawn a picture of it in her sketchbook and shown it to Serena with the confidence of someone presenting a fully formed proposal. Serena had looked at the drawing, looked at the lot, and said, "Okay," just like that. The garden was imperfect. The rows were not entirely straight. There was a section near the fence that got too much shade and stubbornly refused to produce anything, which Nia had decided to fill with wildflowers instead, and which had turned out to be the best decision anyone made all season. Serena tended it in the early mornings before the town woke up fully, in the particular quiet she had learned to stop filling with noise. She had started the business class in February, in the back room of the diner on Tuesday evenings. 6 women the first night, 14 by the 3rd week. She taught what she knew: financial basics, pricing strategy, how to read a contract, how to have a conversation about money without apologizing for needing it. She was a demanding teacher. She took it as a compliment and adjusted nothing. But she had also learned to listen differently. Not for the moment when she could respond, but for the actual content of what someone was trying to say. It was harder than it sounded. She was still working on it. One of her students, a woman named Patrice, who made quilts and had been severely underpricing them for 11 years, sold 3 pieces to a gallery in Nashville in April. She had called Serena from the parking lot afterward, crying and laughing at the same time, and Serena had sat on the porch of her house now, she had stopped calling it her mother's, and felt something move through her that she had no precise word for. Close enough to joy. She was getting better at letting it in. Caleb had changed too, in the ways that mattered. He still worked hard, that was structural, part of how he was built, and she had stopped wanting to change it. But he had learned to stop at the end of the day, to come to dinner and stay for it, to accept help when it was offered. He had started visiting Diana's grave on Sundays instead of avoiding it. He brought Nia sometimes. Nia would bring a small bunch of whatever was flowering in the garden that week and set it down carefully. And sometimes she'd talk, tell Diana about school, about the garden, about whatever she was thinking. And Caleb would stand beside his daughter with his hand on her shoulder and let himself be present in the grief instead of running from it. He still felt the weight of what he hadn't been able to do for Diana. That would never entirely leave him, but he was no longer using it as a reason to refuse everything good. The dinner was Caleb's idea. A Saturday in late August, the heat finally breaking into something bearable, the light going gold and long over the tree line. He had strung lights in the yard, folding tables borrowed from the church, food contributed by half the neighborhood. Nia had made a cake. It listed slightly to one side, and the frosting was applied with the enthusiasm of someone unconcerned with precision. She carried it out from the kitchen with enormous ceremony and set it in the center of the table and looked at Serena with an expression of complete satisfaction. "I made it myself," she announced. "Dad helped with the oven part, but I did everything else." "It looks perfect," Serena said. Nia beamed and went to find Mrs. Patterson. The yard filled slowly. Gerald and his wife Patrice and her husband, families from the neighborhood, Mrs. Patterson holding court at one end of the table with the authority of someone who considered herself the event's co-host, regardless of whose yard it was. There was music from a portable speaker Nia controlled with the seriousness of a professional DJ. Caleb found Serena near the garden fence as the evening settled in, the string lights warm against the darkening sky. He stood beside her for a moment without speaking. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said, and meant it. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her since that first morning at the grocery store. Steady, without the performance most people put on when they wanted something from her. She had spent 20 years in rooms full of people looking at her and had almost never felt seen. He managed it without trying. Later, when the food was mostly gone and the cake had been distributed, and Nia had finally surrendered the speaker, someone changed the music to something slow. Caleb turned to her with the slight, questioning tilt of his head that she had come to understand as his version of asking without words. She had never been much for dancing. She had always found it inefficient. She took his hand anyway. They moved slowly in the space between the tables in the gold light, while the people who had become, without her planning it, without her allowing it, without her doing anything except slowly and stubbornly learning to stop running, her community talked and laughed around them. Nia appeared at the edge of the dance space, watched them for approximately 4 seconds with the evaluating gaze of a child forming an opinion, and then apparently decided this was acceptable, because she spun away to go steal the last piece of cake before anyone noticed. Serena watched her go. "She's going to run the world someday," she said. "She's going to try," Caleb said. "Somebody better teach her the paperwork side." Serena laughed, quietly, the kind that came from somewhere real. She had lost a company. She had lost the life she had spent 20 years building, the identity she had constructed from a decision a 9-year-old made in a hallway when her father walked out the door. She had come back to Havenwood with nothing. And somewhere between a flooded ditch and a community garden and a kitchen table conversation that neither of them had planned, she had found the only thing she had never known how to look for. Not power, not control, not a version of herself that no one could touch, a place where she had stopped pretending. She leaned her head gently against Caleb's shoulder in the gold light, in the yard that had been her mother's and was now hers, in the town she had once been ashamed of and was no longer. The music played, the lights held, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Serena Voss was exactly where she wanted to be. Serena walked into Havenwood with nothing. No title, no money, no plan. And for the first time in 20 years, she had no choice but to actually show up as herself. Not the CEO, not the woman who had all the answers. Just a person who was tired and lost, and quietly terrified that without the empire, there was nothing underneath. Turns out there was. There usually is. We spend so much of our lives building walls we call achievements, schedules we call purpose, distance we call strength. And it works, until it doesn't. Until something takes it all away and leaves us standing in the wreckage, wondering who we actually are when no one's watching. Caleb didn't have a title either. He had a broken-down shop, a daughter who needed him, and a grief he hadn't figured out how to put down. But he showed up every day anyway, not because he had it together, because showing up was the one thing he could still choose. Two people, two different kinds of lost. One small town that didn't care about either of their resumes. That's the part that stays with me. If it stayed with you too, subscribe. We tell stories here that don't make the headlines but probably should. New one coming soon, and you won't want to miss it.